March 5, 1942. Portsmouth Navy Yard, Kittery, Maine. Lieutenant Commander Harry Linwood Hicks stood on the deck of what appeared to be an ordinary cargo ship, his hand resting on steel that concealed enough firepower to sink a German U-boat. The vessel's holds were packed with pulpwood, flammable, unstable, but the only material that might keep her afloat after a torpedo strike. His orders were simple in concept, suicidal in execution. Sail into U-boat hunting grounds, pretend to be a helpless merchant vessel, draw enemy fire, then reveal hidden guns and destroy the submarine before it destroyed them. The USS Attic was America's answer to the Wolfpack savaging the Atlantic coast, where 141 sailors would soon discover that deception in warfare demands the ultimate price. In January 1942, the American East Coast burned. German U-boats, operating with near impunity in what submariners mockingly called the second happy time, were sinking merchant ships within sight of Florida beaches. Operation Paukenschlag, drumbeat, had brought the war to America's doorstep with devastating efficiency. Between January and March 1942, U-boats sank 87 ships totaling over 500,000 tons in American waters alone. Tankers exploded off Long Island, freighters went down off the Carolinas, and bodies washed ashore on vacation beaches. The US Navy, caught unprepared despite British warnings, scrambled for solutions. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, faced a strategic disaster. Merchant mariners were dying at rates that made frontline combat look safe by comparison. The convoy system, proven effective in World War I, hadn't yet been fully implemented along the American coast. Merchant ships sailed independently, often with lights blazing against a backdrop of illuminated coastal cities, perfect silhouettes for hunting submarines. U-boat commanders later described it as shooting fish in a barrel. The statistics told a brutal story. In the first 6 months of 1942, German submarines would sink over 600 ships in American waters and the Caribbean. American industrial might meant nothing if the materials never reached the factories. Oil from Texas couldn't fuel the war effort if it exploded in flames 50 miles offshore. Raw materials from South America were useless at the bottom of the Atlantic. On January 20th, 1942, Admiral King sent an urgent coded message to Commander Eastern Sea Frontier. The message requested immediate consideration of Queen ships, the term for Q ships, decoy vessels that had seen limited success in World War I. The British had pioneered the concept during the previous conflict. Q ships were heavily armed merchant vessels with concealed weaponry, designed to lure U-boats into surface attacks. The logic was straightforward. German U-boats carried limited torpedoes, expensive and difficult to replace. When attacking what appeared to be a worthless tramp steamer, submarine commanders often conserved their torpedoes, choosing instead to surface and sink the target with their deck gun. This was the moment of vulnerability the Q ship exploited. Panels would drop, revealing hidden 4-inch naval guns, machine gun positions, and depth charge projectors. The helpless merchant ship would hoist the white ensign or stars and stripes, transforming instantly into a warship. The surprised U-boat, caught on the surface, would face overwhelming firepower at point-blank range. In World War I, British Q ships had engaged U-boats in 150 encounters, sinking 14 submarines and damaging 60 others. The cost was steep. 27 Q ships were lost out of 200 deployed, with casualty rates far exceeding normal merchant service. By 1917, after Germany adopted unrestricted submarine warfare and began attacking without warning from submerged positions, Q ship effectiveness plummeted. U-boat commanders grew wary of any ship that seemed too tempting, too slow, or too alone. The element of surprise, the Q ship's only real advantage, evaporated once the tactic became known. Yet, in January 1942, with American ships dying by the dozen, the Navy resurrected the concept. Project LQ was born from desperation and presidential interest. President Franklin Roosevelt, himself a former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, suggested that young German submarine commanders might be unfamiliar with World War I tactics. It was, in hindsight, a dangerous assumption. The Navy allocated $500,000 from an emergency fund to maintain absolute secrecy. Expenditures couldn't be traced through normal channels. 5 vessels were selected for conversion at Portsmouth Navy Yard. The cargo ships SS Caroline and SS Evelyn, 30-year-old sisters from the Bull Line, would become USS Attic and USS Asterion. The tanker SS Gulf Dawn would become USS Bighorn. The trawler MS Wave would become USS Eagle, later renamed USS Captor. The schooner Irene Myrtle would become USS Irene Foresight. SS Caroline had an unremarkable history. Launched July 3, 1912 from Newport News Shipbuilding, she'd spent 3 decades hauling freight and passengers between the West Indies and the eastern seaboard. During World War I, she'd carried a small armed guard detachment, but was never commissioned as a naval vessel. At 382 feet long, displacing 6,610 tons, powered by a single screw producing 1,200 horsepower, she could manage perhaps 10 knots on a good day. She was slow, obsolete, and entirely unremarkable. Perfect camouflage. The conversion teams at Portsmouth worked with extraordinary speed and secrecy. Workers installed 4 4-inch naval guns, mounting 3 in concealed positions behind false bulkheads and panels. 8 machine guns were positioned where they could sweep a U-boat's deck. 6 K-guns, depth-charge projectors, were mounted to attack a submerging submarine. The ship's holds were packed with pulpwood, chosen because it was buoyant enough to keep the vessel afloat after 1 or 2 torpedo hits. The material was problematic. If dry, it could spontaneously combust. If wet, it would rot and potentially catch fire anyway. But it was the best available option to ensure the ship wouldn't sink immediately, denying her crew the chance to engage the enemy. Lieutenant Commander Hicks understood the mathematics of his mission. His ship was expected to last approximately 1 month after commencing operations. This assessment was documented in writing by Navy planners. The mission required Attic to sail alone through the most dangerous waters in the Atlantic, deliberately making herself a target. When a U-boat attacked, the crew would stage an elaborate deception. Some men, designated as the panic party, would visibly abandon ship in lifeboats, selling the illusion of a helpless merchant vessel. The remaining crew, the gun crews, would stay hidden at their battle stations, waiting for the submarine to close range. The U-boat, believing its prey to be finished, would surface to deliver the coup de grace with its deck gun. Only then would Attic reveal her true nature. But the plan had a fatal flaw that became apparent during the rushed conversion. Supporting forces initially planned to assist Q ships in distress were unavailable. In mid-March 1942, just days before Attic's scheduled departure, the crew received word that if trouble arose, they should expect no help. They would be alone, completely, irrevocably alone. On March 23, 1942, at 1300 hours, USS Attic and USS Asterion departed Portsmouth Navy Yard on their first war patrols. The 2 ships followed separate courses to different patrol areas. Operational orders specified that after 5 days at sea, Asterion should be approximately 480 miles south of Attic's position. This spacing was designed to cover more ocean while maintaining secrecy. Each ship would masquerade as an independent merchant vessel, a straggler from a convoy, or a tramp steamer sailing alone, exactly the kind of target U-boats preferred. Attic's crew of 141 men knew the risks. They were volunteers, fully briefed on the mission's dangers. Among them was Fireman First Class Ralph Dietrich of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, who would become Adams County's first World War II serviceman listed as missing in action. The crew represented every corner of America: farm boys and city kids, career sailors and wartime recruits, all united by duty and the grim knowledge that their ship was essentially bait in a trap. 300 miles east of Norfolk, Virginia, on the night of March 26, 1942, the trap was about to be sprung, but not the way American planners had envisioned. German submarine U-123, commanded by 29-year-old Kapitänleutnant Reinhard Hardigan, was on her second drumbeat patrol. Hardigan was already a decorated ace. On his first American patrol in January, he'd sunk 9 ships totaling over 50,000 tons, including the tanker Norness, south of Long Island, the first ship sunk in Operation Paukenschlag. He'd been awarded the Knight's Cross for that patrol, and would later receive oak leaves to the decoration. On this second patrol, departing Lorient on March 18th, he'd already sunk the American tanker Muskogee and the British tanker Empire Steel. U-123 was a Type 9B long-range submarine, 251 feet long, capable of 18 knots on the surface. She carried 22 torpedoes and mounted a 105mm deck gun, plus 37mm and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons. Her crew of 52 veteran submariners had developed deadly efficiency. At approximately 1700 hours on March 26th, U-123's lookouts spotted a wisp of smoke on the horizon. Hardigan ordered a course to intercept. Within an hour, the submarine had closed the distance enough to identify the target as what appeared to be a small freighter or cargo vessel sailing alone. The ship's silhouette matched dozens of merchant vessels plying American waters. Nothing about her suggested danger. For the next 7 hours, U-123 stalked Attic on the surface, the submarine's low profile making detection nearly impossible in the fading light and moderate swells. Hardigan was methodical, patient, analysing his target for any sign of deception. But Attic played her role perfectly. She maintained a steady course and speed, showing no awareness of the predator closing from astern. No sudden course changes, no increase in speed, no radio transmissions that might indicate she'd spotted the submarine. Hardigan later noted in his war diary that he observed nothing suspicious about the vessel's behaviour. At 2200 hours, 10 p.m., U-123 began her attack approach. At 00:37 hours on March 27th, Hardigan gave the order to fire. One G7E torpedo, launched from 700 yards, tracked straight and true. The weapon struck Attic on her port side, directly under the bridge. Fire erupted immediately, casting an orange glow across the dark water. The ship took on a slight list to port, her bow beginning to settle. Attic's radio operator sent out a terse SOS under the ship's merchant disguise. SS Caroline, torpedo attack, burning forward, not bad. 2 minutes later, a second message, more urgent. Torpedo attack, burning forward, require assistance. The messages were picked up by radio stations at Manasquan, New Jersey and Fire Island, New York. But no help was coming. The nearest destroyer was hours away. As U-123 proceeded around Attic's stern to assess the damage, Hardigan observed what he expected to see. A lifeboat was being lowered on the starboard side. Men were visible, apparently abandoning ship. The panic party was performing exactly as trained, selling the deception of a helpless merchant crew fleeing their dying vessel. Hardigan, convinced his target was finished, but wanting to conserve torpedoes, decided to close the distance and finish the ship with gunfire. What happened next lasted perhaps 90 seconds and determined the fate of 142 men. As U-193 moved closer, still on the surface, Attic made her move. At approximately 0100 hours, the Q ship revealed her concealed armament. False panels dropped away, exposing gun positions. The American ensign ran up the mast. 4 4-inch guns, 8 machine guns, and depth-charge projectors all opened fire simultaneously. The American gunners had been waiting at their stations, hidden below decks and behind false bulkheads, for hours. When the order came, they erupted from concealment. Shells and machine gun tracers lit up the night, converging on the U-boat at point-blank range. For a moment, just a moment, the trap seemed to work. Hardigan reported being caught completely by surprise. The first American salvo found the U-boat's conning tower. Fähnrich zur See Holzer, a young officer on the bridge, was struck and mortally wounded. Shell fragments raked U-123's deck, and the submarine's thin hull rang with near misses. Hardigan executed a crash dive, his crew scrambling to get below and seal the hatches while American shells continued to rain down around them. But Hardigan was not a junior officer unfamiliar with Q-ship tactics. He was a veteran submariner who'd already sunk 18 Allied ships, and U-123 was a modern submarine, far more capable than the U-boats of 1917. Instead of fleeing, Hardigan used the one advantage submarines possessed. He went deep, circling beneath the surface, analysing the situation while his crew patched minor damage and tended to the dying Holzer. The American attack, though furious, had inflicted only superficial damage. Attic, meanwhile, was genuinely crippled. The torpedo had torn open her port side. The fire was spreading despite damage control efforts. The pulpwood cargo, supposed to keep her afloat, was beginning to smoulder. The ship's engine room reported power fluctuations. She was dying, but slowly. Perhaps too slowly. Hicks faced an impossible decision: abandon ship and save his crew, or maintain the deception in hopes of luring the submarine back into gun range. He chose to continue the mission. The panic party remained visible in their lifeboat, maintaining the pretense of a merchant crew abandoning their vessel. The gun crews remained at their stations, hidden, waiting for the U-boat to resurface. Hours passed. At 0327 hours, U-123 surfaced approximately 1,000 yards from Attic. Hardigan had decided to finish what he'd started, but this time he kept his distance and approached with extreme caution. The submarine's deck gun crew prepared to shell Attic from beyond effective range of her concealed weapons. But Hardigan never fired. He watched, waiting, suspicious. Something about the ship's condition didn't match a normal merchant vessel. She was burning, but not sinking fast enough. The lifeboat crew was visible, but seemed too organized, too controlled. Hardigan had survived 18 months of combat by trusting his instincts. His instincts now screamed trap. At 0350 hours, 23 minutes after U-123 surfaced, Attic exploded. The fire had reached her ammunition magazines or the depth charges stored on deck. The detonation was catastrophic, described by Hardigan as multiple heavy explosions in rapid succession. The Q-ship simply disintegrated. Her bow section, stern section, and amidships structure separated and sank in different directions. The fireball was visible for miles, a brief sun born and extinguished on a dark ocean. 141. American sailors died in seconds or in the freezing water immediately afterward. Not a single man survived. 10 minutes after Attic's destruction, U-123's crew held a burial at sea for Fähnrich zur See Holzer, their only casualty. The young officer had been hit during Attic's brief counterattack and died of his wounds. Hardigan then set course to continue his patrol. A severe gale blew in shortly after midnight, churning the seas and scattering any wreckage. The next morning, a USAAF bomber dispatched to Attic's last reported position found nothing. USS Noah, a destroyer, and USS Sagamore, a tug, steamed toward the area throughout the day. Heavy seas forced Sagamore to return to port. Noah remained in the vicinity, methodically searching the coordinates where Attic had transmitted her final position. The destroyer found minimal wreckage, shattered planking, floating debris, oil slicks, no lifeboats, no bodies, no survivors. USS Asterion, Attic's sister ship operating 240 miles to the south, had also received the distress call. Lieutenant Commander Glenn Legwin ordered an immediate course change to Attic's position. Asterion arrived to find only empty ocean and scattered flotsam. The realization hit with brutal finality. Attic was gone. Her entire crew was gone. The first American Q-ship sortie had lasted exactly 4 days. For over 2 years, the families of Attic's crew received no details about how their loved ones died. The ship's loss was classified. Official notifications simply stated, "Missing in action." On July 2, 1942, Rear Admiral Russell Wilson wrote a memorandum for the Chief of Naval Personnel. For administrative purposes, the subject ship should be considered to have been lost on 27th of March 1942. He added a chilling instruction. Aside from such notifications as having already been made to dependents, no further publicity will be given to the loss of this ship. Attic had become a phantom, a ship that officially didn't exist, crewed by men whose deaths couldn't be acknowledged. On April 9, 1942, Radio Berlin made a cryptic broadcast. The High Command said today that a Q-boat of 3,000 tons was sunk by a torpedo after a battle fought partly on the surface with artillery and partly beneath the water with bombs and torpedoes. The Germans knew exactly what they'd faced, but American families weren't told until after the war. When captured, Kriegsmarine records finally revealed the truth about U-123's encounter with the mystery ship that had fought back. Hardigan himself later reflected on the engagement with unusual candor. During his second drumbeat patrol, he sank 8 ships totaling nearly 40,000 tons. To commemorate the patrol, he sent a lyrical signal to BDU, U-boat headquarters. 7 Tankern schlug die letzte Stund, die U-Falle sank träger. For 7 tankers the last hour has passed, the U-boat trap sank slower. The U-Falle, U-boat trap, was Attic. Hardagan recognized what he'd faced and included it in his official tally as a warship kill, not a merchant sinking. On April 23, 1942, while still at sea, Hardagan received notification that he'd been awarded Oak Leaves to his Knight's Cross, becoming the 89th recipient of this decoration. U-123 docked at Lorient on May 2, 1942, ending Hardigan's career as an active U-boat commander. He'd be assigned to training duties for the remainder of the war, his combat record complete. He survived the war, lived into his hundreds, and died in Bremen on June 9, 2018, at age 105, the last surviving German U-boat commander from Operation Paukenschlag. But Attic's sacrifice wasn't entirely in vain, though the lesson learned was bitter. Project LQ continued with the remaining 4 Q-ships. USS Asterion, having witnessed her sister ship's fate, continued operations with grim determination. She conducted 8 Q-ship patrols between March 1942 and January 1943, sailing through the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and along the east coast. Asterion never encountered a U-boat. On at least 2 occasions, she had sound contacts that suggested submarines nearby, but no engagement occurred. During one patrol in April 1942, Asterion witnessed the torpedoing of the tanker Comol Rio by U-154. She picked up sound contacts and attempted to locate the submarine, but the U-boat had already departed. The frustrating pattern repeated throughout 1942. Q-ships patrolled. Merchant ships sank. But the Q-ships and U-boats never met in circumstances favourable to the decoy vessels. German submarine commanders, warned about Q-ships through intelligence briefings and Hardigan's own report, approached suspicious vessels with extreme caution. After her 8th patrol, naval inspectors examined Asterion and delivered a sobering assessment. The ship could not survive a single torpedo hit. Her 3 large cargo holds, even filled with pulpwood and later with over 18,000 flotation drums, couldn't provide sufficient buoyancy. 1 torpedo would sink her before her crew could effectively engage the attacker. The same vulnerability that had killed Attic would kill Asterion if she ever drew fire. In January 1943, the Navy pulled Asterion from Q-ship operations. She underwent extensive modification and was transferred to Coast Guard service as a weather patrol ship. She survived the war and was scrapped in 1946. USS Big Horn, the converted tanker, conducted 6 Q-ship patrols between July 1942 and May 1943. On one occasion in May 1943, her crew sighted a periscope and attacked with depth charges for 4 hours. A heavy swirl indicated a submarine diving, and an oil slick appeared afterward. Whether Big Horn actually damaged or destroyed a U-boat remains unconfirmed. German records show no submarine lost at that location. The claim remains unverified. Big Horn was reassigned to weather patrol duty in January 1944. USS Eagle, later renamed Captor, the converted trawler, conducted multiple patrols and never sighted a submarine. USS Irene Forsyth, the schooner, suffered through 1 calamitous patrol before developing structural problems in a heavy storm. The Navy recalled her in October 1943, and the ship was decommissioned shortly after. By the end of 1943, Project LQ was abandoned. Not a single German U-boat had been sunk by American Q-ships. Attic remained the only US Q-ship to actually exchange fire with a submarine, and she'd been destroyed in the engagement. The cost-benefit analysis was damning. 5 ships converted and deployed, 1 destroyed with all hands, 141 dead, 0 confirmed U-boat kills, hundreds of skilled sailors diverted from other duties, thousands of hours at sea in dangerous waters. The Q-ship program, Admiral King concluded, was not worth the effort expended. The failure wasn't due to lack of courage. Attic's crew had performed exactly as ordered, maintaining discipline and deception even as their ship burned beneath them. The failure stemmed from fundamental changes in submarine warfare since World War I. By 1942, U-boats were larger, faster, and more sophisticated than their World War I predecessors. Type 9 boats like U-123 displaced over 1,000 tons and carried twice the torpedo load of Great War submarines. Modern hydrophones and detection equipment allowed U-boats to identify potential threats from greater distances. The element of surprise, the Q-ship's only real advantage, had evaporated. German naval intelligence had thoroughly documented Q-ship tactics from World War I. U-boat commanders received specific training on identifying and avoiding decoy vessels. When Hardigan recognized Attic as a Q-ship, he had decades of institutional knowledge to draw upon. He knew to attack from maximum range, to remain submerged, to be patient. Most critically, unrestricted submarine warfare eliminated the Q-ship's core tactical premise. In World War I, prize rules required submarines to surface and allow merchant crews to abandon ship before sinking the vessel. This gave Q-ships the opportunity for close-range surface engagements. By 1942, no such rules existed. U-boats attacked without warning, often from submerged positions, using torpedoes almost exclusively. The scenario where a U-boat would surface within gun range of what it believed to be a helpless merchant ship simply didn't occur with any frequency. When it did occur, as with Attic, The U-boat commander was typically experienced enough to recognize the trap before it fully closed. The mathematics were brutal, but clear. From December 1941 through 1943, German U-boats sank approximately 1/200 merchant ships in the Atlantic and American waters. Q ships accounted for exactly 0 U-boat kills. Compare this to other anti-submarine measures implemented during the same period. The convoy system, finally adopted along the American coast in May 1942, immediately reduced sinking rates by over 50%. Dedicated anti-submarine warfare groups, combining destroyers and aircraft, sank 67 U-boats in 1942 alone. Shore-based patrol aircraft, particularly long-range B-24 Liberators equipped with radar and depth charges, sank another 31 U-boats in 1943. Hunter-killer groups built around escort carriers sank 53 U-boats in 1943-1944. Even merchant ships armed with defensive weapons, the Defensively Equipped Merchant Ships program, proved more effective than Q ships, driving off or damaging numerous U-boats. The strategic lesson was clear but difficult to accept. Deception in warfare works when the enemy lacks information about your capabilities. Once Q ship tactics became known, thoroughly documented in World War I, the deception lost effectiveness. No amount of courage or seamanship could overcome the fundamental flaw. Q ships required the enemy to make a specific mistake, attacking on the surface at close range. Experienced U-boat commanders simply didn't make that mistake, yet Attic's crew deserves remembrance precisely because their sacrifice illuminated this truth. Their deaths proved conclusively that Q ships were obsolete in modern submarine warfare. No other American Q ship crew would die attempting the same futile tactic. The Navy, learning from Attic's loss, shifted resources to more effective anti-submarine methods. Every sailor who survived the war because convoys were properly implemented owed an indirect debt to the men who died on Attic. Their deaths, though tactically unsuccessful, provided strategic clarity. On March 30, 1942, 4 days after Attic exploded, wreckage was finally sighted by search aircraft approximately 10 miles south of the ship's last reported position. The wreckage consisted of shattered planking, scattered debris, and oil. No large sections of the hull remained visible. No bodies were recovered. The severe gale that had struck hours after Attic's destruction had scattered everything across miles of ocean. For 75 years, the exact location of Attic's wreck remained unknown, lying in approximately 18,000 feet of water, 300 miles offshore. The depth makes recovery or detailed survey impossible with current technology. In Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the family of fireman First Class Ralph Dietrich received notification that their son was missing in action. He'd been 22 years old when Attic departed on her fatal patrol. Dietrich was memorialized at Evergreen Cemetery in Gettysburg and listed on the tablets of the missing at the East Coast Memorial in Battery Park, New York City. He was Adams County's first World War II casualty. 140 other families received similar notifications. Not until the war ended, when captured German records became available, did these families learn the specific circumstances of how their loved ones had died. Attic received 1 battle star for her World War II service for her engagement with U-123 on March 27, 1942. Reinhard Hardigan, the man who sank Attic, lived an extraordinary post-war life. Captured by British forces in May 1945, he spent 18 months as a prisoner of war before being released. He returned to Bremen and built a successful oil trading business. He served on Bremen's city council for over 32 years, becoming a respected figure in local politics. In 1986, George Betts, the father of the skipper of the tanker Muskogee, which Hardigan had sunk, reached out to the former U-boat commander. The two men struck up an unlikely friendship. Hardigan provided Betts with photographs of his father, taken from U-123's periscope before the attack. He told Betts that he'd given the Muskogee survivors water, rations, and detailed instructions for reaching land. Sadly, the survivors never made it. Betts reportedly held no grudge. Hardigan remarked that their personal contact shows me that this should be the last war. It was a sentiment neither man could have imagined in March 1942, when Hardigan was hunting American ships and Attic was hunting him. The Q-ship Attic represented a paradox of naval warfare, a vessel designed to deceive the enemy that instead revealed uncomfortable truths to her own side. She proved that courage alone cannot overcome tactical obsolescence. She demonstrated that historical tactics, no matter how innovative in their time, must be constantly re-evaluated against evolving threats. She showed that the costs of learning these lessons through combat are measured in lives that can never be reclaimed. Project LQ failed as an anti-submarine measure, but succeeded as a cautionary tale about the dangers of fighting the last war's battles with the last war's methods. Modern submarine warfare in 1942 bore little resemblance to submarine warfare in 1917. U-boats operated differently, attacked differently, and possessed capabilities that rendered Q-ship tactics nearly useless. The British had learned this lesson expensively during World War I, when Q-ship effectiveness plummeted after 1917. Post-war analysis concluded that Q-ships diverted skilled crews from more effective duties, sinking only 14 U-boats while losing 27 Q-ships and hundreds of skilled sailors. The Americans relearned the same lesson at even greater cost. 0 U-boats sunk, 1 Q-ship destroyed, 141 men dead. Countless patrol hours that could have been spent escorting convoys, hunting submarines with proper anti-submarine warfare vessels, or training new crews. Yet the Q-ship concept refuses to die entirely, because the core idea, deception as a force multiplier, remains fundamentally sound. Modern naval doctrine incorporates deception extensively, from radar jamming to false signals to decoy drones. But these methods recognize a critical principle that Q-ships violated. Effective deception must adapt faster than enemy intelligence. Once the deception is known, it must evolve or be abandoned. Q-ships in 1942 used the exact same tactics as Q-ships in 1917. German U-boat commanders had 25 years to study those tactics, develop countermeasures, and train their crews to recognize the threat. The surprise was gone. The advantage was lost. The lives were wasted. On April 9, 1942, 2 weeks after Attic's destruction, Admiral King reviewed the preliminary reports of her loss. He ordered Project LQ to continue, but with significant modifications. Q-ships would avoid lone patrols when possible, operating instead in coordination with hunter-killer groups. Their mission would shift from actively hunting submarines to serving as bait in coordinated traps. But these modifications couldn't change the fundamental problem. U-boats weren't taking the bait. By late 1943, with not a single confirmed U-boat kill to the program's credit, King ordered Project LQ terminated. The remaining Q-ships were reassigned to weather patrol duty or decommissioned. The Battle of the Atlantic would be won through other means: convoys protected by destroyers and corvettes, long-range patrol aircraft closing the mid-Atlantic air gap, improved radar and sonar technology, breaking of German naval Enigma codes, hunter-killer groups with dedicated escort carriers, increased merchant ship production, outpacing sinking rates. These methods, collectively, turned the tide against the U-boats. By May 1943, Black May. German submarines were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. Admiral Dönitz temporarily withdrew U-boats from the North Atlantic, acknowledging defeat in the campaign. Not a single Q-ship contributed to this victory. The USS Attic and her crew of 141 sailors remain a footnote in the larger battle of the Atlantic. But footnotes matter. They remind us that behind every strategic decision, every tactical doctrine, every operational plan, real people pay real costs. Lieutenant Commander Harry Linwood Hicks and his crew volunteered for a mission they knew was extraordinarily dangerous. They trained for a scenario they understood might cost their lives. They executed their orders with discipline and courage, maintaining their deception even as their ship burned and explosions shook the hull. They died believing their sacrifice served a larger purpose, protecting the merchant convoys, hunting the submarines, winning the war. That their tactical approach was flawed doesn't diminish their courage. That the Q-ship program failed doesn't erase their service. That they killed no submarines doesn't mean they died for nothing. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are learned through failure. Sometimes the clearest truths emerge from mistakes. Sometimes courage must be recognized, even when the mission itself was fundamentally misconceived. The men of USS Attic died so that American naval commanders could learn, definitively and conclusively, that Q-ships had no place in modern submarine warfare. That knowledge saved lives, lives that would have been lost on subsequent Q-ship patrols, lives that were instead deployed in more effective roles, lives that contributed to eventual victory. At the East Coast Memorial in Battery Park, 141 names are inscribed on the tablets of the missing. Fireman, First Class, Ralph Dietrich of Gettysburg, Lieutenant Commander Harry Linwood Hicks of the U.S. Navy, 139 other sailors whose names deserve to be remembered individually, but whose collective sacrifice tells a singular story. They laughed at the decoy ships, until those ships drew real enemy fire for real stakes in a real war where theoretical tactics met brutal reality. The Q-ships of World War II proved that some ideas, however innovative in their time, cannot survive the evolution of warfare. But the men who served aboard those vessels proved something far more enduring. That courage persists even when tactics fail. That duty transcends the wisdom of orders. That sacrifice has meaning even when victory proves elusive. USS Attic's wreck lies in 18,000 feet of water, 300 miles off the Virginia coast, marking the grave of 141 American sailors who believed their deception could change the course of the war. They were wrong about the deception, but they were right about one thing. Their service mattered. Their sacrifice counted. Their memory endures. And the lesson they taught, at terrible cost, helped ensure that no other American sailors would die attempting the same obsolete tactic against an enemy who had long since learned to recognize the trap. That is their legacy. That is how they changed the war. Not through the submarines they never sank, but through the truth their deaths revealed. In warfare, as in life, some lessons can only be learned through loss. The crew of USS Attic paid the tuition. The U.S. Navy learned the lesson. And 141 names on a memorial in Battery Park stand as permanent testament to the men who served as teachers in the cruelest school of all. Combat at sea against an enemy who knew all the tricks and all the counters and all the ways to kill the deceivers before the deception could work. They laughed at the decoy ships. Until March 27, 1942, when one decoy ship proved that courage and deception together still weren't enough against experience, technology, and tactical evolution. The laughter stopped that night. 141 American sailors stopped breathing, and the Q-ship program, though it lingered for another year, was effectively finished. The trap had been sprung, but it caught the trappers, not the prey.